Very few mobsters have gone down in history as being as bloodthirsty and as ruthless as Anthony Salvatore Casso, a notorious member of the Lucchese crime family from his initiation in 1974 to an eventual arrest in 1993. Over the course of his career, Casso is believed to have participated in up to 36 murders, and these are only the ones he confessed to. Casso, who was nicknamed Gaspipe by his Lucchese associates, was even described to have desired to carry out his murderous actions, and other mobsters referred to him as a homicidal maniac. Eventually, after the law caught up with him, he would become one of the highest-ranking mafia members to become an FBI informant and took a plea agreement to reduce his potential sentence. Who was Anthony Casso, though? Really? What made him such a ruthless and efficient killer? And what did the course of his career in organized crime look like? Today, we're taking a trip to the streets of 1970s Brooklyn to discover where the infamous butcher's career began and how the law finally brought him down. This is the brutal life and times of Anthony Casso. On the 21st of May, 1942, Anthony Salvatore Casso was born to Michael and Margaret Casso, a family of Italian descent in South Brooklyn, New York City. Casso's grandparents were originally from Campania in Italy and had moved to New York in the 1890s to seek out a new life. Casso's life in the Mafia may have been secured from the very beginning. As a baby, Salvatore Calambrano was assigned as his godfather. Calambrano was a capo regime working for the nefarious Genovese crime family who at the time controlled Brooklyn's docks, extorting traders as they delivered their goods. Despite this, the record suggests that his parents did not want Anthony to enter a life of crime, and his father particularly attempted to dissuade him while he was still young. As he grew up, Casso was described as a violent individual and showed an interest in guns from an early age. While he was still in school, he became very handy with a pistol. He and his friends built a makeshift shooting range on a Brooklyn rooftop, and by the age of 16, he was able to hit most targets. His abilities as a gunman would also begin to make him money after he dropped out of school, age 16. He found work shooting birds of prey for local pigeon keepers and was able to live on his earnings for a while. In the late 1950s, Casso became affiliated with organized crime on a small scale for the first time, perhaps in order to supplement his earnings as a gunman. He became a fully initiated member of the South Brooklyn Boys, a street gang that specialized in drug trafficking and extortion across a broad territory. His first brush with the law would come in 1958, where he was arrested following a public street brawl with a small-time rival gang. Casso's father visited him at the police station and reportedly attempted to scare him into quitting a life of crime while he was still young, but of course, to no avail. He continued to run with the South Brooklyn Boys until the start of the 1960s, when his criminal endeavors caught the eye of Christopher "Christy Tick" Furnari, the leader of the 19th Hole Crew, a division of the mighty Lucchese crime family. Throughout the early 60s, Casso became a keen associate of the Lucchese crime family, primarily working in loan sharking, illegal gambling, and drug dealing, essentially with Furnari as his mentor. Casso's violent nature and affinity with weaponry led him to be used as muscle in many of Furnari's dealings and rackets. And there is evidence to suggest that it is around this time that his casual violence turned bloodthirsty. In 1961, Casso was arrested for a second time as an attempted murder suspect. The unnamed victim, however, refused to identify him, potentially out of fear due to his reputation and gang ties, and he was acquitted. By all accounts, Casso had a way with women and not a particularly pleasant one. As a young adult, he entered a relationship with Rosemary Bellotti, whom he met while working with the South Brooklyn Boys gang. It was a strong, serious relationship in its early years, and Bellotti's parents had every hope that the two would be wed. The relationship eventually broke down, however, and in 1968, Casso married Lillian Del Nova, another South Brooklyn resident. The couple had 2 children together, yet without Del Nova's knowledge, Casso was still seeing Bellotti. Over the course of several decades, Casso set Bellotti up with a house in New Jersey and would frequently meet with her as part of an almost 30-year affair. Eventually, when Casso's career ended as a result of his arrest, all would become clear to Del Nova, who was understandably furious. The two remained married, and Del Nova visited him often. But the betrayal hung over her like a black cloud, and she never viewed Casso the same way again. Anthony Casso was integrated fully into the Lucchese crime family as a made man in the year 1974, undertaking the formal initiation ceremony in Manhattan. He joined the crew of Vincent Furnari, who had control of Manhattan's 116th Street and 14th Avenue in Brooklyn. Over the course of the following year, Casso spent much of his time engaging in the common mafia rackets of extortion, drug trafficking, and illegal gambling. But his true calling was just around the corner. Mere months after he joined up with the Lucchese family formally, Victor Amuso, the future boss and at the time a rising mobster in the organization, took notice of Casso's efforts. The two became close friends and entered a partnership spanning several decades, which saw them embarking on increasingly violent endeavors. Burglary, assault, murder, and elimination of police informants were all in a day's work for this deadly duo. Still working under Furnari's 19th hole crew, Casso and Amuso sought out those that could help them on their nefarious exploits. Security experts, lockpickers, and master thieves were looped into their newly formed Bypass Gang, a division of Furnari's crew that specialized in burglary. In just a few months, they went from hitting homes and local businesses to jewelry stores and even banks, stealing more than $100 million across the 1970s and 80s. Multiple bank robberies throughout this time that went unsolved are thought to have been attributed to the Bypass Gang, and its remnants are believed to still carry out jobs to this day. So prolific and successful was Casso in his work that when Furnari was promoted to the consigliere of the Lucchese crime family shortly after, he opted to make Casso a capo regime in his place. Casso respectfully declined and suggested that Amuso should be the one with the power. Amuso accepted, and Casso worked as his right-hand man in almost all of his dealings and exploits. For years, Casso and Amuso worked closely together and became extremely wealthy. In 1985, however, they were presented with an intriguing offer. Frank DeCicco, capo regime in the Gambino crime family, had approached Casso asking for his help with a coup that was brewing within their ranks. DeCicco and the infamous John Gotti had planned to oust and kill Paul Castellano on the basis that he was too weak to lead the Gambinos. They could not go to the commission about this, and so attempted to seek support from notoriously skilled members of the remaining four families to keep things under wraps. Casso agreed to help, but he was cautious. This would be a massive violation of the commission's rules, and they themselves could be killed if they were caught. The assassination of Castellano went ahead, but Casso and Amuso would later turn on Gotti and DeCicco, siding with the bosses of the four families as they sought revenge on Castellano's murderers. Casso and Amuso themselves were tasked with the elimination of Gotti and DeCicco, and surprisingly were instructed to use a car bomb to carry out the act, a banned method of killing mafia members due to the high risk of collateral damage. Still, they set to work and planted a bomb in DeCicco's car on a day when he and Gotti were known to be making a stop at a local social club in the April of 1986. The bomb was detonated as planned when the car started, and DeCicco was indeed killed. But Gotti was nowhere to be seen. He had evaded the Butcher of Brooklyn, but the same cannot be said for many others. The heads of the Mafia's 5 families were struck with the culmination of the Mafia Commission trial, a lengthy court case that saw each of the family's leaders indicted with serious charges of extortion, labor, racketeering, and murder. 8 key Mafia leaders were convicted, and most of them were told that they would die in prison, receiving 100 year-long sentences. The commission had received a massive blow, and to ensure the continuation of the Mafia in New York City, several decisions on who would replace those convicted needed to be made. Amongst those imprisoned was Anthony Corallo, who at the time was the leader of the Lucchese crime family. Feeling that the trial would not go his way, he preemptively transferred power to Casso and Amuso. Once again, Casso recommended Amuso as the boss, while he took the position of underboss. After a couple of years of acting as a consigliere with two of the most ruthless mafia members at the helm, the Lucchese crime family continued to grow and prosper. It is estimated that at the height of their power, they were bringing in over $100,000 per month from combined racketeering, extortion, and unlicensed video game machine setups, with an additional $500,000 per year coming in from a large concrete supplier business and a protection racket established in New York City's garment district. As well as this, they each took a cut from every crime committed by lower-ranking mobsters across the Lucchese crime family. Casso was also known for bringing in a great deal of wealth for the Lucchese by way of his relationships with Russian mobsters operating in the United States. He was particularly close with Murat Balagula, a Soviet Jewish refugee from Odessa who had subsequently set up an extremely successful multi-billion-dollar gasoline bootlegging scam in New York. Balagula entered an agreement with Casso and Amuso, where he would receive support from the Lucchese family's members in exchange for a cut of this illegal operation. The two organizations also mutually protected one another and announced their alliance to other gangs in the region, strengthening both groups. At the height of this partnership, Balagula and Casso's gasoline bootlegging scam became the largest source of income across all of the five families. This agreement would culminate in a brutal reveal of Casso's violent streak. However, Balagula became involved in a rivalry with fellow Russian immigrant Vladimir Reznikov, who caught wind of Balagula's highly successful schemes and wanted in. Instead of offering to work with him, Reznikov threatened him, demanding $600,000 and a percentage of all his earnings in exchange for Balagula's life. Balagula paid up but soon suffered a huge heart attack. He survived, but Reznikov was still demanding money. At this stage, Balagula called upon Casso for support, who was furious that somebody would extort his ally in this manner. Casso planned to put an end to this once and for all, and told Balagula to arrange a meeting with Reznikov the following evening where he would supposedly receive his money. Reznikov headed to the meeting point, but stormed out furious with empty pockets. In the car park outside, Joseph Testa and Anthony Center, two veteran Lucchese mobsters, were waiting. Reznikov was shot dead, and Balagula's problems with Eastern European gangsters ended that night. Over the remainder of the 1980s, Anthony Casso became known as quite literally a homicidal maniac, using brute force and meticulous executions to solidify his power. After his run-in with Vladimir Reznikov, one of Casso's most notable murders came in the form of Gambino crime family associate James Heidel. Heidel was ambushed by Casso himself in 1986 after he had become the underboss of the Lucchese crime family. Heidel had participated in a botched assassination attempt on Casso, who in turn used crooked lawmen to his advantage. Louis Eppolito and Stephen Caracappa, corrupt New York police officers, kidnapped Heidel on Casso's behalf and brought him to the notorious underboss. Casso took great pleasure in torturing the young mobster, shooting him several times in non-fatal areas before finally delivering a killing shot. While this was a vicious act of revenge, other murders carried out by Casso were little more than business. At the turn of the 1990s, Casso was as prolific as ever with his ruthless murdering spree and tended to target members of the Lucchese family whom he deemed a flight risk, soldiers and associates who were liable to become FBI informants under pressure. The first of these murder victims was Bruno Facciolo, a Lucchese soldier who was suspected of cooperating with law enforcement. The last thing Casso and Amuso wanted was to end up like their former boss, Anthony Corallo, and so they opted to stamp out any potential traitors before they could act. Casso worked with Caracappa and Eppolito once more to lure Facciolo to a Bensonhurst garage where he was subsequently shot and stabbed multiple times. His dead body was stuffed into the boot of a car, and a dead canary was placed inside his mouth as a warning to other would-be informants. After Facciolo's death, it would become apparent that he was not an informant and had no prior interactions with law enforcement. Facciolo was not the only unnecessary victim of Casso's hasty, murderous tendencies either. Casso's corrupt police officers working on his orders would also kill a man by the name of Nicholas Guido, believing him to be a mobster who had been accused of turning informant. Guido was in fact a civilian with no ties to the mob and was murdered on Christmas Day. Also falling victim to Casso's brutal nature were John Morrissey, a construction union leader allied with the Lucchese crime family who was suspected of working with law enforcement, and Anthony Fava, Casso's personal architect who had done little more to upset Casso than complained about late payments for his work on Casso's mansion. Notably, Casso would use a newly promoted mobster, Alphonse Little Al Darko, to carry out a lot of his dirty work when it came to killing. Darko was initially under the impression that he would be working for the Lucchese Construction Panel, a committee that oversaw unions and construction businesses in Brooklyn, but it soon became apparent that this was not the case. Years after he cut ties with the mob, Darko would come clean about his relationship with Casso and Amuso, who used him in any way they could. In his own words, when a job needed to be done, whenever they needed to do something unpleasant to someone, I was chosen by them. In one notable incident, Amuso and Casso ordered Darko to murder the entire Jersey crew, the New Jersey faction of the Lucchese family after Anthony Axaturo, its capo regime, refused to increase the family share of their profits. Axaturo managed to escape the clutches of death and has since cut ties with the mob. He has previously spoken out against Amuso and Casso, claiming they did not uphold traditional Cosa Nostra values in the Mafia. When discussing Casso, he is known to have said, "All he wanted to do is kill, kill. Get what you can, even if you didn't earn it." By 1991, Casso was in hot water. He had received a tip that he was about to be indicted for his crimes, but summoned Darko once more for another big hit. They had marked Peter Chiodo, a Lucchese capo regime, for death after he pleaded guilty to his mafia-related crimes without their permission. Darko was tasked with bringing Chiodo down, who was surprised at the identity of his target, given Chiodo's otherwise good standing with Casso and Amuso. Darko assigned two of his men to ambush Chiodo while he was working on his car at a Staten Island gas station on the 8th of May, 1991. Despite receiving 12 bullet wounds to his limbs and body, he survived the ordeal, with doctors remarking that his obesity likely saved his life. Casso continued to threaten Chiodo following the botched assassination, remarking that if he continued to testify against the Lucchese, he would be murdered. This didn't particularly deter Chiodo, so Casso threatened to murder his wife instead. In order to protect his family, Chiodo became a government witness, and a growingly paranoid Casso turned his attention to Darko, cutting ties with him altogether. On the 29th of July 1991, Amuso was arrested after an unidentified Lucchese gangster tipped off law enforcement about his whereabouts and wrongdoings. Casso was made de facto boss in his absence. As such, some even suspect that Casso may have been the leak. Casso reportedly had no desire to lead the Lucchese crime family and attempted to arrange an escape attempt on Amuso's behalf. For this reason, many believe that he did not leak any information regarding Amuso to the feds. Amuso, on the other hand, refused to leave prison, believing that his life would be at risk if he did. Casso was reluctantly placed in charge of the entire family, where his fragmented domain would be racked by suspicions about those formerly close to him. At the forefront of this was Darko and Chiodo. Upon hearing the news that Casso had been placed in charge of the family, Darko followed in Chiodo's footsteps and defected, which brought a series of murder indictments on Casso's doorstep from across his criminal career. In fact, Casso had arranged a series of unsuccessful hits on Chiodo's family, and Darko believed he would be the butcher of Brooklyn's next victim any day. FBI agents were soon hot on the trail of Casso's mobile phone calls, which were traced using informants' tapped phones, and he was arrested while showering at Rosemary Belotti's home in Mount Olive, New Jersey in the January of 1993. The FBI searched the property and found $340,000 in cash, a rifle that linked Casso to his murders, and paperwork detailing the structure and plans of the Lucchese crime family. While awaiting trial, Casso was imprisoned at New York's Metropolitan Correctional Center, facing enough murder charges that would ensure he spent the rest of his natural life behind bars. He continued to administrate the Lucchese crime family's movements from prison, but knew that given his impending fate, an escape attempt may be his best bet. He began organizing a series of escape plans, and one of them very nearly worked after he bribed a security guard at the jail's entrance. At the very last minute, another guard stopped him in his tracks and he was thrown back in. He subsequently planned to assassinate his judge, Eugene Nickerson, and started tasking Lucchese gangsters with ambushing prison buses. None of these plans would come to fruition, however, as Amuso stripped Casso of his underboss title as a result of his recent failures, formally recognizing him as the man who had betrayed him as a scapegoat. Casso was getting desperate. Facing life in prison with multiple gangsters lined up to testify against him, and following multiple failed escape attempts, he saw his only option as becoming the very thing he had attempted to stamp out throughout his career: an informant. Casso's decision to side with the law led him to Agent Richard Rudolph. He would meet regularly with Rudolph, and at first found it difficult to recount just how many criminals and groups of criminals he had been involved with. He's reported to have told him around this time, "Every time I stepped out of the house, I committed a crime. You expect me to remember all of them?" Casso's first act as an informant was to tell Rudolph about his relationship with corrupt NYPD officers Caracappa and Eppolito. They had committed an estimated 8 murders by his command, and in addition to this, had provided the Mafia with the names of many informants, which in turn caused a whole host of other murders to occur. From here, Casso began to reel off a long list of his co-conspirators throughout his Mafia career, and admitted to several murders that he had planned but didn't go ahead. Of the murders he did carry out himself, he would confess to 12 initially, but indicated that he was complicit in another 24, bringing the total to a possible 36. Of course, there is every chance that many details were left out, and the actual count could be much higher. Casso's meetings with Rudolph continued until the beginning of 1994, and the FBI were finding it difficult to accept his role as an informant given his brutal history. Federal prosecutor Gregory O'Connell, who spent a lot of time with Casso discussing his crimes, is known to have said, "It gets to a point where somebody is just too evil to put on the stand, believing that many of his most violent actions would not look good in front of a jury or the public." Despite his cooperation, Casso's credibility as a witness was constantly in question. He was caught lying on multiple occasions, exaggerating his role in certain crimes, and even fabricating stories to make himself appear more valuable to prosecutors. In 1998, after years of cooperation, the government withdrew from their agreement with Casso. They cited his pattern of lying and manipulation as reasons for revoking his deal. Any hopes he had of a reduced sentence evaporated. Instead, he was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 455 years. Casso spent his remaining years in the ADX Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, one of the most secure facilities in the United States. He was isolated from other inmates, spending 23 hours a day in his cell. Even from behind bars, Casso remained bitter and defiant. He wrote letters claiming he was innocent of many charges, blamed others for his downfall, and showed little remorse for his actions. He never fully acknowledged the devastation he caused to countless families and communities. Anthony Casso died on December 15th, 2020, at the age of 78 from complications related to COVID, 9, and various health issues. His death marked the end of one of the most violent chapters in modern organized crime history. "All he wanted to do is kill," etc. had said. That statement captures the essence of Anthony Casso's criminal career. Unlike other mobsters who saw violence as a necessary tool of the trade, Casso seemed to relish it, seeking out opportunities to inflict harm. His partnership with corrupt law enforcement officials was particularly disturbing. By turning police officers into his personal hit squad, Casso corrupted the very institutions meant to protect society. The Ippolito and Caracappa case remains one of the most shocking examples of police corruption in New York history. Casso's willingness to kill innocent people like Nicholas Guido, murdered simply because he shared a name with a suspected informant, demonstrates the recklessness of his violence. He showed no regard for collateral damage, no concern for basic human decency. His betrayal of his closest associates, including Darko and Chiodo, revealed a man driven purely by self-preservation. Even his partnership with Victor Amuzzo, which had lasted decades, dissolved into mutual suspicion and recrimination. When Casso became an informant, he did so not out of any moral awakening, but out of desperation. He continued to lie and manipulate even in his cooperation, ultimately sabotaging his own plea deal through his inability to tell the truth. The Butcher of Brooklyn left behind a trail of bodies, broken families, and shattered lives. His 36 admitted murders represent only a fraction of the damage he inflicted on society. Each victim had families, friends, and futures that were stolen by Casso's brutality.